welcome back to another video on the channel. So we're going to get this Evo engine back into the car today. So this is going to be the progress we really want to see closer to getting this car running. So if you ain't subscribed to the channel, subscribe. If you are a subscriber, click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button and that will notify you anytime I upload. So we're going to get this engine inside the engine bay today and see how far we can get along with it. We've got a lot to do obviously when it's still in the engine bay, just to make sure everything's perfect. So we're going to get the car as high up as possible and then get the engine underneath, and that's the best way to do it. I found lift it upwards instead of going in from the top. It's a lot more difficult. Got the big transfer case, the big gearbox that's on there for the four-wheel drive system. If you're wondering where I've been for the last month or so, I caught COVID earlier in February, so I had to quarantine. I got over it pretty quickly within about a week or so. It didn't really affect me that badly. I know it affects people in different ways. Luckily, it didn't give me any lasting effects after that. Anyone out there that has it and they're suffering a long-term illness, I really feel sorry for you. So yeah, that's where I've been for the last month or so. Now we're back and we're getting on to doing these projects again. Well, so as you just seen, we're starting to get somewhere with the car now. You can see all the turbos bolted on, looking nice in there. We've just bolted on this new power steering pump. This one's like very good condition compared to the old one. The old one's all seized up, leaking, all sorts of things. Put a brand new belt on there as well. This is a little bit longer, that belt as well, because the old belt was a little bit too tight. Inlet manifolds on there looking fresh. We've got all the injectors on there. These are ID1000 injectors. You can see we've got little pigtails on there. So we've got a little upgrade going on with the car. I'm not going to use the standard coil packs anymore. We've just got a delivery through, so I'm going to run you through these little bits that I've got. You can see there's a gauge there and a few other little bits, so I'll quickly show you them, and they're going to be nice little upgrades for the car to allow us to have a little bit more spark. So you probably know what we're going to be doing with them. Got some brand new spark plugs, all the oil, everything's turned up, so I'll show you what we've got. Right, so a few of the bits that we've got. So we've got some brand new spark plugs, obviously no brainer to chuck a set of spark plugs in there. The same spark plugs that are in there already, you can see BPR AESs. These are good plugs up to high horsepower, but at the minute the fueling's a little bit rich. You can see on the plug, it's very hard to actually see in the video, but it is actually running really rich at the minute, because the person who mapped the car, or the company that mapped the car, didn't map a cold start map on the car. So from cold it runs really rich and puffs a little bit of black smoke out. So we're going to sort that out. And while we're sorting that out, obviously don't want to foul up a load of really expensive plugs. So we've just got some brand new plugs for that as well. Gearbox oil, you can see here, going with the Millers. This is, I love this oil, CRX LS, obviously LS for the LSD. We're running a RS setup in this, so we've got RS gearbox, transfer case and RS rear diff. As you know, we've got no AYC on this car, so I use this gearbox oil. It's pretty much the go-to oil that I always use in all the high performance cars. Here we've got a gauge, very important, this gauge, because the car ain't going to be started up until this gauge is wired in, but it's an awesome bit of kit. So anyone who's used SPA gauges in the past will know how good their quality their gauges are. So you can see here oil, so we've got oil pressure and oil temperature with this gauge, and you can see the fitting kit with it is really comprehensive, and it's why it's worth so much money. So it's obviously an expensive gauge. I think they're like £2,500. But you get everything in there, high pressure oil sensors, every bit that you need, the fitting kits, the lines, the whole lot. So that's going to be fitted before the car's even started. You can see in here, this is an upgrade to the car. So moving on to this big upgrade. So this is a very nice upgrade that we wanted to do for a while. So we've gone to individual coil packs on this car now. Obviously running the Link ECU, we can run these. So you can see we've got lovely fresh brand new coil packs and a lovely carbon fibre bracket as well. So that's going to look nice and tasty inside the car. Might not even run a plug cover now with that one. Unfortunately on the loom, as you see, the plugs have actually been cut off. So these plug into the original loom. I've got some plugs on order and they've not come here yet, but they'll be wired in, so this can actually plug into the original plugs. And you can see here, this is the stock coils. These are what these look like. I think it had a CDI set up on it before, because it actually has the plugs cut off and then they've been wired and plugged and all messed around with. So I'm pretty sure it had a CDI set up on it before. I don't know why it was removed, but it was. And you can see the stock coils, they like bolt on, and you've got 2 coils running 4 plugs, whereas now you've got 4 coils running each individual plug, sequential spark. Absolutely perfect control, and we have no problems with spark blowout at high boost, because we want to run some nice boost through this engine. So this is another lovely upgrade that we've got going on the car. So here's another thing we've got as well. So you can see here's a cam cover, but it's been unmodified. So obviously we're running a breather system on this car, so it's got welded in bungs here, and there's another one here. So that's got to be done first, and you'll see there's a breather system on there if you haven't seen the car before. Never liked this rocker cover, cam cover, whatever you want to call it. It's obviously flaked, cracked, whatever. It's just on there at the minute, just temporarily. That's going to go. The whole theme of the engine bay is going to change to like a satin black. All this blue and everything's going to go. So perfect time to do that. So got one of these and got it bead blasted, sand blasted, whatever you want to call it. At the minute, you see in here, it has baffles in the back, and when they're sand blasted, you get like sand that gets trapped behind the baffles. So first, you're going to have to drill out all these baffles before it's painted. Clean it up thoroughly, then get these breather system welded into the appropriate parts, the same parts here and here. Once that's done, this is going to be painted in the original red colour that comes with the car, and then we'll get everything else is going to be satin black, so it's going to look a lot tidier. Obviously cosmetics are not the most important thing at the minute. This wiring as well, another cosmetic thing. See how untidy it is from the previous owner. It's never been touched since then. Obviously the car's just been getting the engine built, and you know, this has just been sitting around. So this nasty bird's nest of wire, and that's all going to be sorted out. It's going to be done like similar to what I've done with the Astra. It's going to be tucked back through the bulkhead. It's all going to be stripped down because obviously we're running no AYC on the car, so there's no need for any of these relays. You've got this no aircon. We ain't got no aircon on the car, obviously. So this aircon, the fuse box, everything can be removed. It's going to be a lot tidier. That's a future project. Obviously, you want to get it running first. That's the priority. But you'll see it looking a lot tidier in the future, like most of the engine bays I have. Right, so while the front end is all apart, it's a no-brainer to get this gearbox oil change. So you can see here, there's the oil fill plug there on the front of the gearbox. If you don't know where it is, you're changing it yourself. Just while we're here, you can see I fitted that new slave to the car. The old one was absolutely knackered, and that's going to help with the clutch and the biting point. So let's get that bolt out, filled it up with some nice golden goodness. So filling up the transfer case on these cars is a little bit more of a different process. So you can see here, this is the fill plug up here, this is the drain plug down here. Now, I prefer the gravity feed method when I'm filling this up, so it fills it up nice and slowly, because it has a tendency, if you try pumping it in, it will pretend that it's full and it will start spilling out of there, and people will then put the plugs in when it's underfilled. There's another way to do it where you pump it up through this drain plug. You put a seal around it, pump it in through there. You want to get about 1 litre in there and then let it drain out of the actual fuel plug itself. You can also put it through this towel pipe, or the actual towel of the transfer case itself. You can pump it in there if you've got the transfer case off. Obviously ignore this bolt, I've got a new one on order because this one went missing. It's never been on the car since it actually come here. But yeah, you can see here I'm just gravity feeding that. It's dripping out slightly still, but if I tried pumping that in, it will just all spew out. So what's happening at the minute, it's obviously just filling up all these gears and everything gets in here. And obviously if you don't fill this transfer case up enough, you're going to burn out this pinion inside the transfer case. That's obviously not good for it. So you can see here it's slowly filling up. It's not actually pouring out the fuel plug, and that's the way I like to do it. But everyone's got different methods. So anyone who does these sort of builds will know that the longest time is all these little small bits, these little finicky bits that are just trying to make everything tidy. So engine bay's getting together now. We're getting ready to get this rad in. So the whole turbo setup is complete, all bolted on there nicely. So you can see it's nice and tidy on there now. All the exhaust, everything underneath is all done, so the car can actually be dropped down now. Unfortunately, when the engine was installed, slightly damaged that oil filter, so just waiting for a new one of them to come before I can put oil in it. And yeah, so basically we're going to get this rad in now, intercooler on, just all the pipe workings. Well, there we go. The car's all back together. Now, the frustrating thing is I'm still waiting on a couple of silly little bits that are stopping me from starting it. As you can see, I've put the shift in to be able to do it. It is literally ready to get the oil pressure up, a few checks over, check the fuel pressure and stuff like that, and it would have been able to start. But we've got things like obviously the coil packs, waiting for the plugs on them, waiting for that oil filter down there. Obviously that's been damaged, can't use that one. Also, oil cooler, we've got to get some different banjo fittings for that. You can see the engine is pretty much ready to be started, so we only really need to get the fuel pressure up. You can see here we've got like a fuel pressure regulator down there, and we would have to get the oil pressure up, make sure oil pressure is good before we start it. But unfortunately we're just waiting on them silly little bits at the minute. This oil cooler, I can't fit it at the minute because we fitted a later style housing on there when we fitted the oil filter housing that broke on the last one. Now the banjo fittings on the later ones are M18, and the banjo fittings we've got for the oil cooler are M16, so that's another silly little thing. Everything's ordered and on its way, but with coronavirus everything takes a little bit longer. So obviously while I'm waiting for the parts to turn up, I'm going to wire in this SPA gauge, just so we've got everything ready and going, so we can just literally got the oil pressure up, start the car up, and we're ready to go. So going to wire this in now. The issue that I said that we had with the oil cooler, as you can see here, is these banjo fittings. So on the later models they're M18, and we had to change the oil filter housing, and we didn't really realise that they'd changed to a different size banjo fitting, so we've had to order some new ones of these. So they're on their way. As you can see, they're M16 in the early type ones. So we've got the lines and everything, obviously they all go onto the top of the oil cooler. I've got this brand new oil cooler because you don't want to be using a second-hand oil cooler or an oil cooler with swarf inside it, because you're never going to get the swarf out of there. You can see there's like loads and loads of little fins in there, absolutely impossible to get that out. So obviously you've got the old oil cooler, and this is a brand new one, never been used. So, and obviously another little thing that I've got to do is I've got to fit this loom as well to tell the ECU what the oil pressure is at the engine, so I can get it to turn off. And I've just got to wire that into one of the ports inside the ECU. Very easy to do, really. A lot of them wires ain't going to be used. I think it's only a 3-pin wire, 5 volt or grand signal. And all I've got to do is put these sensors in. So I've got the sandwich plate between the oil filter, so these sensors just going to go into that. That's the oil pressure one, and that's the oil temperature one. Simple enough. Just got to run inside the car. Fit this to a ground and a positive. So this is all the mess that I found behind the dash already. You can see most of this doesn't even go to anything. It's just been cable tied up there. This is how a professional garage blanks off your boost controller. You can see here they just stick in a stud and then cable tie it all behind there. There were so many cable ties and wires and pipes. I'm just trying to dissect it all just to get down to the simplistics. You can see here there's vacuum hoses that are going nowhere. There's power cables going nowhere. So I'm just getting rid of all this stuff because it's not needed, and then we're just going to have one gauge running in there. Right, so if you look under there, you can see there's 2 holes been drilled, not very well. Looks like they've been cut with a pair of scissors, but I'm going to try and drill a hole for a grommet under there, a little bit tidier than that one is now, because that's where the wiring was running through from the bulkhead. You can see underneath the fuel pressure regulator, which I've just moved out of the way. So I've managed to get rid of a lot of wiring from behind that dash. This ain't even all of it. This is just what's in my hand right now. So we've literally narrowed it down to one gauge that does 2 functions instead of 2 gauges with loads and loads of wiring everywhere. So these SPA gauges are amazing. Literally only have to wire in an earth and a positive, and just plug it in basically, and you've got this switch here that allows you to go through all the functions, which I'll show you when I've set that up. So I'm just going to put the gauge into this pillar pod now. As I say, this pillar pod's going to be going, just going to leave them gauges in there as blank, put it in that bottom one, and then we can get the oil pressure up on the car. I've just picked up the oil filter. So just when I picked up a new oil filter that I needed, you can see here this was the damage obviously on the bottom of the filter. It would probably been alright, there's nothing actually inside damaged or anything like that, but there was no way I was chancing it, especially as it was a brand new filter. They're cheap enough, so just went out and got another one. Going to pre-fill this up now with some oil so that we make sure the oil pump's actually got some oil going into it straight away. And then we can get to cranking this thing over and try and get some oil pressure up on it, make sure the gauge is all plumbed in. I always make sure on a new build that you pre-fill these oil filters. So it takes a little while to get them actually filled up. You can see there, a couple of minutes extra over a build is going to make a massive difference. So obviously the engine's got to pre-fill this oil filter before it gets anything into the engine anyway. So you just keep that oil going in, make sure that this thing gets well and truly filled up before it goes onto the engine. So a lot of people put on dry oil filters, and you know, for the first couple of seconds the engine's just basically running dry before it fills up this oil filter. So make sure you pre-fill them up. Right, so the oil filter's on, oil pressure sensors in. You can see I've gone into the sandwich plate, and then oil temperatures in the sandwich plate as well. They've been Loctited, thread lockered, and it's got seals on it as well, so they're not going to leak. Just temporarily cable tied along here at the minute while I get us started, and then we'll tidy that up in the future. Just want to get that oil pressure up, most important thing. So now we can literally go all over the car, get the fuel pressure up. Obviously just got to bolt this back on where I went through the bulkhead, bolt the fuel pressure regulator back on, get the fuel pressure up. I'm going to wire these in temporarily without the plug, because at the minute we ain't got the plug till tomorrow, and I want to try and get it fired up today in this episode. So just going to wire these in with some pin connectors, and then we can start turning this thing over, get oil pressure up, make sure everything's good. If it is good, then we can fire up and you'll hear her running. So let's get on with it. So one thing I'm going to do before I start to crank her over and get the oil pressure up is get these plugs back out. So you don't want to put any sort of load on the engine bearings, on the conrods, on the connecting rods, on the crankshaft while you are turning it over. And obviously while you're turning it over, the plugs in, there's going to be a compression build up inside the cylinder. You want the oil pressure to get up, and this is the most important part of any engine. That's why I always say I like to be there when there's an engine being started, especially one of my own, because I know it's being started up properly. So we're going to take the plugs out of this now, get the oil pressure up the right way, then we can put the plugs back in, get the fuel pressure up, make sure there's no leaks, then we can get to firing her up. As long as the oil pressure comes up on the gauge and we're all good and I'm happy, then we'll start her up. Until then, I will not. This car has to be started up and it has to run and get oil pressure straight away. One of the most important parts. So that's why I always like to be there, or I like to start up the engines myself, the ones that I build. Right, so I've just pulled the plugs out. I've also disconnected the crank sensor so the injectors don't fire. I'm going to hook up the battery to this now, make sure the fuel pressures are good, make sure there's no leaks from the fuel system, get oil pressure up on the gauge, and we can get to starting this thing. So this is the exciting point. Yeah, go for it. Needs a bit of throttle. Yep. Right, there you go. So it's super late out now. I've got a big shifting on the car. You can see it's still a mess in the engine bay at the minute where I've got to tidy everything up, but the main priority was to get this thing running. You heard the engine running. It's a little bit squeaky on one of these pulleys down here, so I just took the auxiliary belt off as well, because the actual tensioner itself really noisy. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's, well, you can see it's flopping around. Tensioner's knackered. Also the idler pulley down here, that one there, that's knackered as well, so going to get a new one ordered. No more squeaking. I'm just going to quickly start it up for you to hear it without the auxiliary belt on, so you can hear how quiet it is. And really happy with that. Can start buttoning up everything. Next video you're going to see it out on the road and driving. If you want to see that, subscribe to the channel, do all the usual stuff, hit the bell icon so you get notifications. Thanks for watching the episode. It's been a long time since this thing's been running. I'm really happy with it.